analyzing citizenship beliefs using a conjoint experiment. And this paper, this project, this idea has been on my mind for quite some time, as you will see in a second. So the data was collected already in 2021, but today is actually the first time that I really present this. So I'm really looking forward to all your comments, questions in the end, all your feedback on this paper, on this project. To start out, I would like to show you a graph that is probably familiar to most of you, comes from the VDEM report, from the latest VDEM report, showing that democracy is under pressure across the globe. And this is the larger background of this paper, of this idea, if you want, so that we see democratic recession in many liberal democracies in the last years. And of course, from a normative perspective, this is worrisome. And the question is, what can we do about this? And I would like to draw your attention not to these macro trends or developments, but to the individual level. So the question how citizens see democracy, how much they support it, and how they also see their own role in democracy. So what is this talk about? We know from the literature, at least there's the claim that citizen support for democracy is essential for democratic stability. This is more or less the starting point of this whole endeavor. And citizen support for democracy and citizen attitudes towards democracy do not only include attitudes towards institutions and elites, but also beliefs about their own role in a democracy. And this is what I want to examine in this paper, and where the focus of this project lies. So what do these beliefs look like? Do different societal groups have similar beliefs? So the basic research question, very straightforward, is what do citizens perceive as essential characteristics of a good citizen? And of course, as you will see in a second, I'm not the first one to go into this question, but I hope that I can provide some new insights here by showing a new measure. And I think this is also the main scientific contribution that I can provide with this project. So improving the measurement of citizenship beliefs, as I would like to call it. I find this term of citizenship norms a bit problematic for some reasons. So I would stick with the term citizenship beliefs, but essentially I mean what has been discussed in the literature using the term citizenship norms. And the status quo here in this literature is that we use rating scales with, I would argue, low discriminatory power. So people just think that everything is important to be a good citizen. And that's difficult if we want to really draw conclusions from this data. I also think that the subgroup analysis that I will present in a second are important and can make a scientific contribution to the ongoing discussion about polarization of norms. So is there a consensus or a disagreement across societal groups when it comes to these citizenship beliefs? And this is already a hint towards the societal relevance of the paper. So I think we can gain some insights for measures to strengthen social cohesion here. So what are shared beliefs about good citizenship? And maybe also some insights for measures to strengthen these norms or beliefs. So let me quickly start out with presenting what has been done in the literature. So what is the state of the art in this research line? And let me start with an attempt of a definition here concerning the term citizenship beliefs. So when we follow Van Lett here, we can first of all define citizenship as the relationship between an individual and a state in which the individual owes loyalty to the state and is entitled to its protection. And of course, the citizenship has different aspects. So there's a behavioral component, but also the attitudinal and the normative component. And it is about rights and obligations. So I think that is very clear also in this definition by Van Dat. It's about civil rights, political rights, social rights, but also about obligations of citizens. So the individuals, if you like, move from being a subject in a democracy to being an actor. And then, of course, there are in the literature many different conceptions of citizenship. And I won't go into this literature and won't go into detail here, but just to explain what is also the background of this whole concept. There are conceptions of liberal citizenship, or there's a liberal conception of citizenship, socio-democratic, communitarian, republican. So at least these four conceptions of citizenship can be distinguished. And they can be found in one way or the other in the conception of citizenship beliefs. So let's go into this concept now that is also probably familiar to some of you. So the concept of citizenship norms, or as I would like to call it, the concept of citizenship beliefs, that was very much put forward by Van Dat, but also by Russell Dalton, of course. So Van Dat provides again a minimal definition of citizenship norms, saying that it is about the image of a good citizen. And I think there are some challenges for empirical research in this research field, because we do not really have a uniform conception here. So this is a very, very minimal definition, this image of a good citizen, but this needs to be filled. And this is, there is no real uniform conception existing in the literature, but we have a dominant approach, and this is the conception by Dalton, and I will explain that in a second. So therefore, I would also draw your attention to Dalton's definition, saying that citizenship norms essentially define what people think is expected of them as participants in the political system, along with their expectations of government and the political process. So this is basically the baseline for the concept. And the concept he put forward and developed looks like this. So he distinguished four categories of citizenship: participation, autonomy, social order, and solidarity. And from that, he draws two different types of citizenship norms. That is duty-based citizenship norms and engaged citizenship norms. I'm not so much interested in this distinction here, but just to show you once again the conception that is really the dominant approach in the literature. And what Dalton was interested in his work mainly was also the generational differences in these norms. But of course, there's also a recent development in this literature, and I would definitely mention that here because it's important. Sarah Goodman has put this literature forward in a very good way, I think, with her work on citizenship in hard times. And she distinguished three dimensions of civic obligations: behavior, beliefs, and belonging. And I do not draw on her conception here, but I still think that it's important to keep that in mind, that also Dalton was not the last word here in this literature, but is still the dominant approach when we look into international comparative surveys, for example. So that's why I also draw very much on his conception. But there is more recent work, and this literature is moving forward, and I think it's moving forward in a real in an important way. And Sarah Goodman has provided here some very important insights in thinking about citizenship norms. And I recently learned that she also worked on a conjoint experiment on that, using her own conception. So also what I present to you here today is something that does not seem to be too far off. So I think that's good news to hear that other people are working on similar stuff. Okay, but as I explained, I will stick to the Dalton conception because it is still the dominant approach in the literature, and it was used also in internationally comparative surveys. And this is what I would like to show you here. So this is the standard approach if you want to measure these citizenship norms using rating scales, as I said. So this is the battery from ISSP in 2014. And you see, again, the items that I've just shown you in the conception of Dalton, and you see that there's a rating scale used. to measure it. And I think that's a bit of the problem here, because people will, of course, think this is all important for a citizen, and it's hard to distinguish what they really think is an important, essential characteristic of a good citizen. So the main empirical challenge is low discriminatory power. As I just said, it's hard to really see what are the actual beliefs of citizens, the priorities, if you want, but also how do they differ across societal groups, if we go one step further, and maybe also how do they differ across countries. That's why I suggest an alternative here, using a conjoint experiment, very straightforward, because I'm building on the work by Dalton, as I will show you in a second. And I hope that I can make a contribution here to move this literature a bit forward. This is the design of the conjoint experiment. As I said, the features are the Dalton items, so I do not go beyond that here. And the respondents in the survey have then seen a comparison of two persons, of two profiles, where they saw whether the feature is applicable or not. So whether this person always votes in elections or never tries to evade taxes. So these have been the items here, the features here, if you want. And each respondent has seen 5 of these comparisons in the survey. And then after each comparison, the respondent had to answer question 1 that you see below the table here. So what do you think is, who do you think is the better citizen, person A or person B? And this is basically the design of this experiment. And the data I use and I present was collected in a 2-wave panel survey based on an online access panel. The geographical scope is Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, but I will only present the German data today. So to make things a bit easier, I will stick to one country in the first step, and then, of course, the next steps, next iterations of this paper would be to include the other countries as well. For Germany, we have 1,824 respondents that participated in both waves. And both waves are necessary because the conjoint experiment was fielded in the second wave in May 2001, and it was pre-registered before, so that's also maybe an important information here. And in wave 1, that's also, I think, interesting to know, we already had an open-ended question on citizenship norms and a ranking scale taken from the ISSP 2014, just to also have a comparison between what we can learn from the conjoint experiment and from alternative measures here. And I think what is particularly important is also the open-ended question. That's why I will present that in a second as well, because we can draw in important conclusions also from analyzing this open-ended question. Maybe we can take a look here. So that's in German now, I'm sorry for that, but the answers have been in German, of course, in the survey. And so that's why it's also here in German in the word cloud. But, and I have to give credits here to one of my research students who has analyzed this data. So it's an unpublished report. I hope we can also make something out of that in the future, but he has really done an excellent job in analyzing this data. And what we basically can draw from this is that the Dalton measure seems to really capture the most important, the most relevant dimensions or characteristics of a good citizen. So it matches very well what people answered in this top of the head open-ended question when they were asked. So if you think of a good citizen, what does this person look like, without knowing anything else about the concept? So this matches quite well with the Dalton features, with the Dalton items. And I think that's, in this case, important because my conjoint experiment then also draws on this Dalton measure. And so it's good to know that this seems to match with what people really have in mind thinking of good citizenship. So what the actual citizenship beliefs of the people are. And then, as I said, we also included the ranking scales, and I also would like to show you the distributions of the 9 items here, just to once again illustrate what a bit of the problem with this rankings, with this rating scales is. Sorry, I said ranking scales, it's rating scales. So the problem is that we really do not, we are really not able to distinguish what people think is important, and they just think that every feature should be fulfilled. And I think that's problematic if you really want to know the nuances here in citizenship beliefs. So that's why I ran this conjoint experiment, and I want to quickly show you the results here. So first of all, the results for the full sample. The AMC is here plotted, and what we can see in this graph on this slide is that, as I already also showed by the open-ended questions, the dimensions are relevant, so the features are relevant that Dalton included in his measure and in his conception of citizenship beliefs. So we see that as soon as they are fulfilled, the likelihood to name this person as a good citizen in the comparison that respondents have seen is higher. So there is no feature that does not matter. I think that's an important conclusion that we can draw from this graph. But we can also see differences, and I think that's the important point here. We see 3 features that stand out, that really seem to be particularly relevant for individuals, for citizens in their citizenship beliefs. And these are obeying the laws, understanding other opinions, and helping others in their own country. It's not always voting, or it's not keeping watch on the government, so not the political ones if you want, but it's about social cohesion if you want. So that's at least my reading of these results. And I think that's important, and that's an interesting result here, an interesting finding, because particularly as political scientists, we always think that always voting is maybe the most important aspect here, but it does not seem to be the case.
Or taxes.
And I will now also go into the subgroup analysis, at least to 2 subgroups. So the first one is educational groups. Basically, you can see here that there are no important differences between the educational groups when it comes to the citizenship beliefs. Maybe it's also, maybe part of the story is here also the way these educational groups have been constructed. And I have to go into this again, because it mixes up the school education and the job education, if you want, so education after school. So I definitely have to check the coding again, but there seems not to be much disagreement across educational groups. And then I took another subgroup, and that also comes from another project, if you want. So this is a place, the rural-urban divide, and the question whether this makes a difference here for the citizenship beliefs. And again, we do not see large disagreement between rural and urban citizens, with one exception. When it comes to keeping watch on the government, we see that this seems to be more important for urban dwellers compared to rural dwellers. But this is the only feature here. Okay, let me conclude, and let me quickly summarize the most important takeaways. So we've seen that Dalton's scale covers the relevant aspects of citizenship beliefs. That's what the open-ended question shows, but also the results of the conjoint experiment. But we've also seen that the conjoint experiment really reveals an interesting pattern here, showing that items that deal with social coexistence or social cohesion receive the highest level of approval. So good citizenship seems to be more about social cohesion and less about politics than we sometimes think. But of course, there are also limitations and open questions, as always. And I hope that I can address at least some of them in the next iterations of the project. So the data is based on a non-probability sample. The question is then, how representative are the findings? The mechanisms are, of course, not really clear. So what causes these citizenship beliefs? We still don't know this from this research. We have some hints from other papers, of course, but it might be interesting also to go into these mechanisms in more detail. And then there is, of course, the question of the generalizability. What I presented to you is evidence from a single established democracy. And I have data on 2 more countries, but also established democracies. So, of course, it would also be interesting to go into countries that are just democratizing or that are non-established democracies, so younger democracies. And this is nothing that I can do with this data, so but this would definitely be interesting, I think, to see whether we find differences or whether we see similar patterns. But still, also in light of these limitations, I think that there is a contribution that particularly lies in the methodological advancement of the literature on citizenship norms, citizenship beliefs. It complements earlier findings, which is also good. I mean, it shows that the batteries, the measures we used for years are really valid. And I think it creates some insights for policymakers, maybe for society in general. So we see from this that citizens care about social cohesion and less about political activism. And I think that's important, an important takeaway, an important insight. The next steps are robustness checks, so exclusion, for example, of speeders. The polling firm has already excluded general speeders of the survey, but of course, you can also see how long they took to answer the different iterations of the conjoint experiment, and that would be a robustness check here to exclude speeders here as well. The inclusion of additional countries in the analysis is definitely a next step, and also additional subgroup analysis, maybe also going beyond socio-demographics and going into, for example, political ideology as a defining feature of a subgroup. Okay, that's it for now. And I would like to thank you for your attention. And I'm looking forward to all your comments, questions now in the discussion, or maybe also later via email. Thank you.